Hi everybody, come on in. We're kind of shut-ins here in Salmon Arm. In a way, when you go out, it's all cloudy and dark and all day long we don't see the sun, and when we do, it's kind of an orangey ball in the sky. So I think there's over 500 forest fires growing in BC. Some of them are very bad. We're covered in smoke. Our air rating is off the charts. Like the worst places in the world, I guess, are worse. So here we are in our small community and we're shut-ins. And I think it's a good time to spend some time with you, have a few laughs, so and learn a little about our orchids. So we are going to talk about a few things today. And one fun thing I think I'll leave to last. That's kind of what they do with the news or something you'll be watching, and they'll say, oh, we're going to talk about this in a minute, and then it's like half an hour later. But it's a little off the subject, so I think I will leave it to last, but it's very interesting. Now, I really want to talk about bark media because I love it and I'm not changing. But I also want to talk about it because there's many different sizes. There's nuggets that are chunky. There's pieces that are flatter and small. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the watering. And here lately, it's been, I had to bring them in because we're not opening the windows in the solarium because of the smoke. So the solarium gets well over 100 every day because it's a bit of a buffer to stop the smoke from coming in the house. And we don't have like central air conditioning. We have one air conditioner in the window. If we did, it would improve the air quality. So I brought them in, and when the smoke all goes, which is soon, I hope, I'll put them back out so they get their chilling for about 2 weeks, a 10-degree drop in the evening temperature so that they will spike for winter. So for now they're back in, and the other reason is I went out there and I looked at them and they were like me if I tried to hike up the mountain in this weather. They were like, ugh. Oh, you poor things. So in they came, and halfway through the week, I gave them a good watering, not just a dribble, but I took them to the sink and ran water through them. I didn't soak them in a bowl or anything. I just ran water. And there's another thing. When you have your bark, make sure that when you're watering, you're covering all the surface of the bark. If you're dipping them in a bowl, you are covering all the surface, but if you're running with a tap or a watering can, make sure you're covering all the top surface of your pot, because bark does not wick. In other words, it doesn't pick up moisture from piece to piece, and that water will just go down where you put it, and it'll go straight down. So that's one thing to remember, so that you have an overall, your bark is getting over, so all of it's being covered inside the pot. So that's another thing to remember. And bark sizes, there's a very important thing about bark sizes. So, and the shape of your bark. Now my bark is large chunk Rexius fir bark that's been very heat treated. And because of the variety of sizes, some are more like nuggets, some are flat, but they're all fairly good and different shapes, you know, they're all different. So when they sit in the orchid pot, they're creating air pockets. But if all the bark Some you see, they're all flat. They've made bark, but it's all flat. So when the flat bark sits in a pot, it's closing up a lot of air spaces. So the air is not getting through so good. So if you want to have lots of air get to your roots, which Phalaenopsis like air on their roots, you want to make sure you're getting those big air spaces. Now, if you have a bigger plant, let's have a close-up of this one. This is such a good example of a few things. Now, this is a big pot, and about equal with here, we put a screen across. So the pot ends right about where my hands are holding it. Now you can see lots of aerial roots have come through. I'll just go around. Some are even, oops, there's another one. Some are even growing through the, I can't get it, it's pretty heavy. But what else do you see in here? You see lots of growth, lots of new growth. And when you see new growth, now let's see if I can get a close-up. There's an aerial root there with a big tip. It's shiny silvery green. It has a big tip, a fresh growing root. So when you see that on any of your plants, especially people that are new to this, let me see if I can show you another one. See a few. All right. Oh yeah, this will be a good one to show. Okay, here we go. Okay, in here we have, that is what we call signs of growth. We are getting new leaves, and we have lots of roots growing. And the bigger the size of the tip of your root that is newly showing growth is how fast it's growing. That's one way of finding out how fast your orchid is growing. So when they're in this growth period, they're getting leaves and roots, and you want them to. So make sure they're getting enough water during these spells. So in spells of growth, they need more water, and when they're resting, they don't need as much. Now, here in the winter, I water once a week. But now, when daylight's longer, supposedly, I don't know what the orchids are going to make of this. It's like a different season, because they're not getting the bright daylight. The heat is getting through, but it's just very close. So in the winter, when they're resting, I water once a week. And now when they're in growth, I water twice a week. Never more than twice. Twice is enough. If you find with twice, you're not, you check your pot, and my favorite way is to dump out half the bark, however much you need to see what's happening with your plant. Dump it out and see how the roots look. Now, if you've got dead soggy ones, too much water. If they're desiccated and shrinking and dry, give them another watering. Or, to help dryness, you could add some perlite. And don't get that real small stuff if you get it. It will help hold moisture and create air. If you get the bigger ones, are better. I ended up buying a bag when I first started. It's still out there. It's way too small, and heaven forbid you breathe it in too. So that's the other thing you could add, to add a little bit more moisture to your potting media, and still have the bark. And I like this bark because when I use the bigger chunks, especially for the larger phals, they get the air. And the other really important thing is I love lots of holes. As you notice, this one has the large holes that Jack put in, and lots of them. They're getting light there too. They're creating photosynthesis. They don't have to be in a clear pot. Now, if you're in a place, and this is something I forgot to say the other time. Now, if you're in high humidity, you want good drainage. You want lots of air holes. Now, for that to do its job, if you take those pots and you're worried about too much humidity, don't put it inside a decorative pot for a long time, because what will happen, it will slow down the moisture getting out of your pot. So if they're dry and you put them in another pot, it will help hold it in. Now, I had a couple small ones that were drying out too fast, and I tried putting some broken up old brick chunks in the bottom to help hold that humidity, and it seems to be working because they're picking up quite nice. Now, when I potted the 3 little species, mini orchids, I chopped up my bark so it was smaller. Now, that was just a couple videos ago, but you're going to be surprised what's happening. Now, if I can get a close-up. Already, okay, 1 flower. And not only that, there is more coming. Lots of new leaves, and I saw lots of little stems with little buds on the end that don't show up too well now, but when they're all out, I'll be showing you. And over on this one, there's lots of sign of nice growth coming. So I think I was very good idea to move. So what we did is we chopped up some of the big bark. I am going to be ordering some more fir bark, but for the smaller pots, I'm going to order some smaller sizes, because smaller sizes also help a pot stay humid. So with my smaller pots, I could use a mixture of my coarse and my fine and increase the humidity a little bit. So now the slipper orchids. Now these are species, and this is the one I dropped on the floor, and I don't know if it should be flowering at this time. It is. I'm waiting and waiting, but so far, see if I can get it in there. Yeah, there we go. And there's the new little leaf coming. They're fan-shaped. And I dropped this one on the floor. I repotted. It was a very fine, tiny little bark. I repotted it. It has some charcoal, some small pieces of my bark, and some small pieces of perlite. So it seems happy. I think if it gets, when they get a little bigger, I change out the pot, which probably won't be for a year or so, I might add some dry leaf mulch in there too. I have a sort of, I have this pot, it's a weave porcelain basket with a little handle. It's very cute. It doesn't have a drain hole in the bottom, but the sides are all open, so we'd have to put a couple of drain holes in the bottom. It's an Italian porcelain Grad-Sale find that's, I don't know, it's worth probably, I believe in using things. If you're going to have them, you may as well use them. And not too often do you see it, but I love to see a variety of slipper orchids in here. I don't know, maybe. So I want to make sure that if you've got your orchids in bark, that you realize the different size of bark will make a difference in the humidity. The shape of the bark makes a difference. There's so much that helps. I seen a dove just came down to visit. Now, the orchid I repotted, there she goes again, is still in bloom. It lost some blooms. The smoke was so bad we could taste it. And we're both coughing away. Poor Jack, he's really coughing. But I noticed I brought them in. They seem happier. They know I rescued them and didn't leave them out there. Now for the little bit of a fun thing. You know what? Not all stones are good for orchids. Now, what is she talking about? Well, you know, have another cup of coffee and I'll tell you. I was Googling all kinds of stuff about smoke and orchids. And I did know that if you're a cigarette smoker, the ethylene gas you get from a cigarette is not good for your orchids. So quit smoking. It's a good reason if you have orchids. And also, and I'm not saying it's, a lot of people say this is true, and it may be or may not be. But if you're a smoker and you're going to handle orchids, wash your hands first, because that tobacco on your fingers could, very rarely, but there's a chance you could get mosaic virus from the tobacco on your fingers. And the other thing is, you know, quite often, if you were to buy a car, we'll say, and a smoker had it, and they smoked in their car a lot, and everything is covered with a film. Well, that film would be on the leaves of your orchids, plugging up that. So I did read that, but then I came across the fun thing. Well, this is from The Guardian. It's a newspaper, and it's dated on August the 22nd, 2018, so it's recent. And did anybody recognize this person? People my age might. Well, Keith Richards, smoking habits and the death of a rare orchid. I'm telling you, you know, I could send you to this site to read it, but here we go. It's not exactly on the scale of trashing a hotel room, but Keith Richards has been blamed for killing an orchid at a library in New York, sending the plant on a death spiral with a few puffs of a cigarette smoke. Yeah, I was so interested when I read this. The orchid, a Phalaenopsis amabilis, was at the main branch of the New York Public Library, where Richard spoke 6 weeks ago. The Rolling Stone had been given a tour of the premises, finishing with an invitation to sit backstage in the office of Marie D. Origini, Deputy Director of the Library's Center for Scholars and Writers. if you're not interested, you know, I just think it's so interesting. And when she returned a little while later, Richards was smoking a cigarette. The office window was open, and according to the library blog, between the cold from the window and the smoke, the little orchid never stood a chance. It took 4 days for its 12 white flowers to tumble from their stem. The New York Daily News reported, also known as a moon orchid, a healthy Phalaenopsis amabilis, I might not be saying that right, requires a lot of light, gentle ventilation, and careful, meticulous watering. I think I would like one. But as Richards would remind you, you can't always get what you want. Although the incident took place on the 29th of October, news of the botanicide only surfaced this week. Luckily for investigators, Richards left both witnesses and evidence at the scene of the crime. Library workers recalled the Rolling Stone was very much a gentleman and nothing at all like a devilish rock star. And as if sensing his wilting effect on the orchid, Richards autographed the clay saucer it was sitting in. He had used this naturally as an ashtray. Isn't that what all smokers do? He extinguished his cigarettes in the sign of the cross and signed it, "Thanks, Keith Richard, 2010. Despite this horticultural havoc at the library, Richards is in fact a budding gardener. I had nothing else to do, he explained in an interview on TV this spring. I took the damn pips out of a lemon and put them in a little flower pot and just left it there, and lo and behold, the thing starts to sprout. He has always planted things, he claimed. I used to grow weed, but I was never there for the harvest, you know." He was at the library to read from his new memoir, Life. Let's see. Anyway, you can look it up if you Google The Guardian and Keith Richards. TheGuardian.com Music 2010, Keith Richards Smoking Death Orchid. So that was kind of the fun thing. Yeah, all stones aren't good for orchids. We like them anyway. And what do you think, Maggie? Maggie's just hanging in, waiting for the smoke to go. And thank you everybody for subscribing. Jimmy's hanging in on the patio. He's ready to go outside, but I don't want us doing any strenuous work till this smoke goes because we're coughing enough. And so he's isolated on the back porch, and everything's kind of waiting. But I'm glad I brought the orchids in, and they seem to have perked right up. So when this decides that it's finished torturing us, we'll go back to normal. And thanks for visiting me. Okay, bye for now.